Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Seth, one of the co-hosts of Engage Podcast, to bring you today another great episode of Engage Podcast. But before I get into today's episode, I just want to say, if you're a first-time listener, welcome. And if you haven't already, go ahead and like and subscribe to wherever you hear my voice right now. So if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, go ahead and hit subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify, hit subscribe. If you're listening on Google, subscribe. You get the point. Also, if you go onto our YouTube page and you're listening to this or watching this on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe. But we are doing something new this year on the with the podcast on YouTube, which is we're actually now adding the visual effects, like the actual recording, the visual recording of us doing the podcast. So you not only can see the guests and what they look like, but you also can feel like you're actually in the room with us. And we're adding more cameras every week, trying to figure this out, because just like we tried figuring out with the sound, played around with it for a few episodes and then got the hang of it. We're doing the same thing with the video. So this week specifically, we added a second camera. So this time you get to see Pastor Anthony be, talking, and to me, it adds a whole new level of experience. So if you're a visual person, go ahead and go to our YouTube page. The link for that's down in the show notes. If you're listening on Apple or Google, go there and you can watch the podcast actually happen real time there. But if you're just listening on a normal podcast platform, that's what you like, then great. It's there for you. Just to let you know. That's it. That's all I have to say. Our guest today is someone I've been trying to get on the podcast for a couple months now, and finally I was able to get him through Facebook Messenger. But he is a great individual, and I loved having him, and he intrigues me so much. His name is Morgan Boyd. He is the youngest commissioner, I believe, in Pennsylvania history. He's 22 years old. Think about that. Most of you listening out there are in your 20s, okay? What were you doing at age 22? I can tell you one thing. You were not the commissioner of anything. But Morgan is a determined individual. He is full of gusto, full of drive, and he's a pilot, for heaven's sakes. At 22 years old, it just blows my mind. I still, even after talking to him, cannot get over the fact that he's 22 years old. But he is wise beyond his years. He's extremely intelligent, and we loved having him on the podcast, and I know you're going to love listening to him. So give it up for our friend Morgan Boyd.
Podcast. This is our second podcast of 2021. Today we have the great privilege of sitting with Commissioner Morgan Boyd. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for, I don't know how much of a privilege it is, but thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Seth, what's happening?
Nothing. I'm excited. Good day. Best job I ever had.
That's what I like to hear. So before we get into some of the discussion here, I just want to share some of the things that I learned about you just moments ago, okay?
Sure.
So you are 22 years old.
Yes.
So you're a young buck. I'm 23.
I could see, that was going to be my guess.
Was it?
Yeah, it was.
Most people guess 21.
See, I overshot a little bit, but no, mine was seriously, guess was 23.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I knew I liked you. So Morgan, you grew up in New Wilmington.
Yes.
And you have been the Lawrence County Commissioner for just over 1 year.
Yes.
And you have a couple of degrees, but the most recent was from Carnegie Mellon, right?
Yeah.
What was the degree at the Carnegie Mellon all about?
That was public policy and management. And so what it was actually a really cool combination of different courses that focused on real world policy, so trade policy, labor force policy, economics, et cetera, and B, it was a big focus on, now that you know all this stuff, we don't just want you to be an analyst, right? Mm-hmm. We don't just want you to be able to regurgitate facts. We want you to be able to go and deploy it in the real world and actually make some change. And so the other half of the degree deals with how do you manage people? How do you work with different people, different caliber, different skill sets to be able to go out and actually affect change in your communities and beyond?
Okay, so there was a practical element to it.
Very, very
A and B, like the theory and studies, and then go do it.
Mm-hmm. In fact, a prerequisite for graduation, and I think this was super cool, and I'm glad that I had the opportunity to do this, was they actually pair you up with a real world agency that has some sort of problem, and you're not allowed to graduate until you solve the problem.
Wow.
Our team, we got partnered up with the Pittsburgh Film Office and the Regional Industrial Development Corporation. And what they were looking at doing down in Pittsburgh, I don't know if either of you are familiar with the Cary Furnace site down in Allegheny County.
Forget it.
It's this old, super cool old industrial site where they used to make steel, and obviously there's not a whole lot of steel manufacturing going on anymore in the region. So it's this flat piece of land along the river. It's one of the last undeveloped tracts of land in close proximity to the city of Pittsburgh. And so they were actually looking at putting in a film lot, something like you'd see in Los Angeles or New York, at that site. And so our job was to assess the feasibility of putting a film lot in there. Would it actually be a positive impact on Pittsburgh's economy, number one? And number two, does it financially make sense? Could it generate enough revenue to support itself without having to pour in additional funding and take a loss, which was a great experience.
Is that the lot? It's technically, I guess, across the river from like Southside Works and all that.
It's close to that area. The other one in that proximity, and you might be thinking of Cary Furnace, and the other one is Hazelwood Green.
Okay.
And that they're actually looking at putting in sort of like a tech center, which is also a cool. Pittsburgh's moving. The direction they're moving in is they're looking at technology and they're looking at education and utilizing their universities, University of Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon, Carlow, everything down there to sort of attract and keep talent, and then move them into a tech-centered workforce or a sort of more advanced white-collar skilled labor force.
Gotcha. Nice. So if you could reflect on your time at Carnegie Mellon and the things that you learned, what would you say are the top 1, 2, or 3 absolute lessons, your lifelines that you learned there that you'd be able to pass on to a listener?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, number one, and this was you grow up in a small town, right? And for better, you get good grades. You're in different honor societies. You're in honors classes, college classes when you're in high school. You go to a good college, but a smaller college. You kind of have the same boat of that, and then you go down to Carnegie Mellon. And I remember walking in thinking, oh, this is going to be a piece of cake. Right, I've been able to be somewhat successful in academics for my past academic career. And you walk into there and you think, oh, you're going to be the smartest guy in the room. You're going to walk in there and you're going to get straight A's and you're not going to have to work a whole lot, very hard at it. And you get your butt kicked because when you're at that level. You've got people coming in from all over the world, and those people have these incredible, unique experiences that they're able to contribute above and beyond anything, that I could. So, for example, I go back to that film project. There was one individual on my team who actually worked in the film industry in Jordan, over in the Middle East. And his skill set, his set of experiences were absolutely crucial to the success of that project because he actually worked in the industry.
Right.
I can do economic analysis on anything. I don't have real life experience, real world experience in the film industry. And so, to that end, I'd say, number one, be willing to recognize your own shortfalls. And number two, when you're working with other people, make sure sort of that you're working in tune with their own skill sets, right? If one person's excellent at film, don't try to supersede that person when it comes to that specific aspect of the job. Learn from him, get what you can from him, incorporate it into what you're doing on your side, and work sort of together in a symbiotic fashion to achieve a project. A lot of it, honestly, I mean, you can dive into specific policy realms, right? If you want to have a 10-hour conversation on the future of work, I could probably manage to get through that. But the big takeaways for me, the life lessons for me, came with working with other people, because at the end of the day, that's what life's about. That's how you move forward projects.
Right. I think I have taped on the back of my office door the following quote, and I don't remember who said this, but you've probably both heard this before. It says, if you are the smartest person in the room, you are in the wrong room.
Yep. I agree 1,000%. It's if you're constantly conducting the orchestra and you're the guy consistently, you're not challenging yourself, right? You're not learning from other people's unique experiences. You're not learning from other people's unique skill sets. And to me, that's really one of the joys of life, is being able to one of the things that I like to do a lot is I travel, not whenever it's not not the middle of a global pandemic, but one of the things I like to do, I'd like to travel a lot. And it's so interesting when you go to different parts of the country or different parts of the world to actually just strike up a conversation with different people, get their perspective. I remember I was in the Middle East briefly a couple of years ago, and I remember just riding the elevator down in the hotel room. And the guy in the elevator with me was a banker from Britain who was working on some trade deal somewhere in the UAE. And so we just started, briefly talking. I was able to poke his mind a little bit about, hey, what's going on in the banking industry? How do you guys go about structuring, a deal of this size? What are your challenges? And it was a 5-minute conversation, but it was just super cool to be able to get that perspective. I think that's one of the great joys of life.
Yeah.
So, real quick, what is out of all the places you've ever traveled to, which one was like your absolute favorite? Like, if you can go back to one right now, where would you go?
I'll give you two because I can't pick one. One, Krakow, Poland. I don't know if either of you have. It's actually, I went there. It was a college trip.
Okay.
And you weren't kidding. It does pick up the taps.
Oh yeah.
But I went there on a college trip, and the trip was actually centered around different memorializations. So Krakow, Poland is in close proximity to Auschwitz, the concentration camp. Mm-hmm. And so I actually had the opportunity to visit there. But in terms of a city itself, with wonderful people, great restaurants, great bars, plenty of things to do. Actually, one of the coolest things is they have these plazas and they're massive, these open spaces, and it's always cold from what I understand in Poland. It's just always cold. And you see this in the United States now with outdoor dining and the need to expand outdoor dining with COVID. But before I'd ever seen it in the United States, I saw it over here, is they actually set up basically tents that you could see out into the plaza outside. So you could eat outside, and they put these heat lamps in there, and you could have, your hot chocolate and your meal, and it was just super cool. And the second place is the place where I was just talking about, which is Dubai in the UAE. Just because, I don't understand architecture. I don't pretend to be an architect, but I do like looking at cool buildings. And there's no shortage of cool buildings and cool sites and cool things to do in Dubai. Actually, what's interesting about there is that I thought was fascinating. They have indoor skiing.
Wow.
They actually have a mall in the UAE, because obviously it's the middle of the desert, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, the people there would, I guess, like to ski. And so they literally built an indoor massive facility where you can go and ski.
Did you do it?
I did not. I've tried skiing once. It did not end well.
So we have a couple things here just personally. One is I also tried skiing once, and that didn't go well. I went with a group of people, and I fell into a huge crater, like I was up to here in ice. And I'm the kind of guy that needs to be on the ground.
Yeah.
My feet. So ice skating, snowboarding, anything like that, it's just not happening with me.
Yeah.
So I did that once, but I went and hung out in the cabin, that was cool. Big
Absolutely.
fireplace, all that stuff. But I went to school in Georgia.
Okay.
And this was my senior year, so I was already known by the staff. And I had a professor that was from New York, New York. So
Yeah.
he had the accent, and he was great, So my senior year, I was walking around, and I had a hoodie on, a gray hoodie, that said Carnegie Mellon.
Yeah.
So I'm walking, and I see the professor, and he stops dead in his tracks. He goes, "No." I say, "What do you mean?" He goes, "No." I said, I don't know what you're talking about." He goes, "There's no way you have any association or went to this school." I said, "Dr. Howard," I said, my mom got this at a garage sale up in Newcastle. He's like, "Phew, good. I'm so glad their standards didn't change."
That's awesome.
It's a great hoodie.
I imagine, yeah, it's probably very comfortable.
It was very, very comfortable. That's why I was wearing it.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that I was taking the reputation of Carnegie Mellon and dragging it through the mud.
Hey, I did the same thing for 2 years. So
Yeah.
I'm right in the
That might
boat
be the
with
greatest
it.
thing I've ever heard.
Dr. Howard. I think he still teaches there, but yeah, he was just shell shocked.
That's great.
That's awesome.
So, one of the things about you specifically, and the reason why I wanted to get you on the podcast as soon as possible was because, I'm fascinated by you and what you do. For the fact that, number one, you're so young, in a job that is a very big job. A lot of people, including myself, look at any public office job as intimidating and it's like a big mountain to climb, and yet you are climbing it. First thing I want to know is who are your personal influences, people who made you who you are and throughout that journey have made you want to take those steps?
So I have a couple of them here too. First and foremost, my dad and my grandfather, without question, because they taught me how to work. I remember I was like 8 years old, something like that. And just some background, my dad owns a business where he grows grass for different golf courses around the country, and so it both grows and distributes them to wherever they need to be, any golf course that needs grass. And so he woke me up. I'm like 8 years old, like 4th to 5th grade summer, the gap in between. It's like 6 in the morning. And it's like the first week of summer after school got out. And all you're doing is you're lying in bed. You're 8 years old. All you want to do is sleep in until 10, wake up, walk downstairs, grab some eggs, and go hang out with your friends. And he shakes me, wakes me, he goes, "Morgan, we're going to work." And I remember like rolling back over and being like, "We're not going to work." And "No, I'm serious. We're going to work." And basically, I get ready. We go out to the business, and he hands me a bucket and a screwdriver. And one of the things about the grass that we grow, there's two different distinct kinds of grasses. One is called bent grass. One is called poania. And if the two grasses mix, it devalues the product. Okay. But because you're mowing with the same mowers, every once in a while, the seed from one grass gets in the other. And if you think of it, they're fields of grass. It's just like a field of corn, but it's a field of grass. And you can kind of tell there's a difference between the types. And so my job for that summer, and the summer that followed, was to go around with this bucket and screwdriver and pluck the one type of grass from the other type of grass, throw it in this bucket, put some sand in that hole, and I did that over and over and over again for 3 summers. And I got paid. It was like $5 an hour. And 8-hour days, and again, you're 8 years old. It's the last thing in the world you want to be doing. And at the end of the 3rd summer, he comes up to me and he says, "You've done a good job, but I just wanted to let you, and we're going to graduate you. We're going to move you into, doing actual work." And he goes, "I just wanted to let you know I could have done that this entire time with fertilizer."
Wow.
And so that was, he made sure that I was in a position where, I know the value of a dollar. I know the value of going out. And working your butt off for 8, 10, 16 hours a day, whatever it takes to get the job done. The second big influence on sort of trajectory of my life was a high school teacher that I had. Her name was Leanne Petro, and she taught the business classes at the school, and she was the advisor for a club called Future Business Leaders of America, which I was heavily involved with back in.
This is in New Wilmington?
This is in New Wilmington area, yeah. And back in 8th grade, 7th grade, I was a shy kid, right? I didn't have a whole lot of friends. I wasn't involved in any extracurricular activities. I didn't do any sport. I was just a shy. I was good at I was good in the classroom, but outside of that, I didn't really do a whole lot. And I joined this club. I had a couple friends that were in it, and I decided it might be something good to put on a resume if I was ever going out to college. So halfway through, I think it was my first year actually. The treasurer for that club decided he didn't want to do it anymore and retired. And this teacher came up to me, Miss Petro came up to me, and she said, "Hey, I think you got some potential. I'd like you to jump into this spot." And I did that, and it sort of forced me into this leadership role where, I'm responsible for and it was like $3,000. But I'm, a 16-year-old, 15-year-old kid responsible for managing $3,000 of funding.
Sure.
And from there, I decided, okay, you know what? This is working well for me. I'm kind of broadening my social circle. I'm gaining a little bit of confidence. I'm going to run for regional treasurer, which the region at that point consisted of all the schools in, I hope I get this right, Lawrence, Mercer, Venango, Erie, and Crawford counties. And I was fortunate enough I got elected to that position. And then I decided, and I don't even know what drove this decision, that I was going to take it one step further and run for state treasurer of this high school club. And again, fortunate enough that I was successful in that endeavor and got elected to to that position, which is where I really learned how to speak publicly, because you're at these conferences, you got 8,000 people in front of you. You got to have enough confidence to be able to walk on stage and sort of own it. But I really credit that teacher with looking at me and saying, you know what, we're gonna give you a shot here.
Yeah.
We're gonna make you this local treasurer position, because I think you'll do a good job at it. I mean, I think that was a turning point in my life, honestly.
So then, do you try to go out and reproduce that with other people to keep an eye on their potential and give them an opportunity?
Absolutely. In fact, I do that at the county. That's actually one of my major jobs, is finding good people who have, I think, a lot of potential. And we have a ton of them in Lawrence County. We have a huge group of really dedicated individuals who, if you put them in the right spot, they'll excel. And my earliest recollection of this is it was a couple weeks after I was sworn into office. So I got sworn in January 6, 2020. And previously, we have a guy on contract right now. He's actually a great guy. His name's Frank Piccari. He used to be the maintenance director, and he decided to retire after 50 years of service. And he's still on we have him contracted as sort of a consultant, just because there's no one that knows the facilities more, but we needed to bring someone up from the ranks to sort of make a deputy director position, a leadership position that could head the maintenance department when he wasn't there. And so I asked around, and again, I'm sort of leaning on other people's experiences with the maintenance department, and I asked around, I said, hey, who would be good for this role? Who's somebody in our maintenance department right now that has a ton of potential, that we could bump into this role and see if he or she excelled? And the same name kept coming back. And what was interesting about this was the individual that we picked actually landed in the role of it was either custodian or maintenance worker. There's two jobs. They do the same things, but there's two different job descriptions. She landed in the role as part of a drug rehabilitation program, where early on, she made a couple mistakes in her life, got involved with the wrong things, got into the criminal justice system, and our district attorney down in Lawrence County, his name's Josh Lamacusi. He's in my mind the best district attorney in Pennsylvania, bar none. He identifies individuals with some level of promise and says, hey, we're going to get you a job. We're going to get you set on this right path. And so that's how she ended up in this position. And she'd been working there for a couple of years, and she'd been doing just a great job. Everybody was saying the same thing. And we approached her and said, hey, can you come up to my office? And first thought is, based on her past, come up to the boss's office.
You're getting called to the principal's office.
And so she walks in, and the way that the office at the time was set up, there was my desk is sort of back in the back of the room, and I had a conference table in my office, and I sat at the head, and the two other commissioners, because there's three commissioners, two other commissioners sat at one to my immediate left and one to my immediate right, and then there was two seats going down the table, and then at the head of the table there was another seat. And so she walks in, and Frank Piccari walks in with her, and I said, have a seat. She sits down at the head of the table. Frank sits, I think it was to her right of her, and we look at her, and you can see she's scared. She's sweating a little bit, and we go, hey, we want to let you know we've been watching you for the past couple of weeks, and people have been paying attention to you in all the great work that you've done over the course of the past couple of years, and we'd like to make you the deputy maintenance director. And that moment for me, that was one of my favorite moments so far internally of being a commissioner, because she started tearing up, because it's you've got that rough road behind you, and someone looked at her just like someone looked at me and said, you know what, we're going to give you a shot.
Yeah, that's cool. So Seth brought up a good point about you being a young guy, right? 22 years old. So I can only imagine that there are some obstacles of being that young,
Oh,
but
absolutely.
also some things that are very helpful, right? So what are the pros and cons of being so young working as a commissioner in Lawrence County?
So yeah, we'll start with the pros. Number one, I think that my age gives me a different point of view from a lot of the people that are currently employed in sort of Lawrence County politics, whether that be your city council, whether that be your township supervisor boards, whether that be different nonprofit boards in the county, whether that be the commissioners. I think a distinctly different worldview that is a tremendous asset to what I do, right? Because at the end of the day, areas like Lawrence County, areas like Mercer County, one of the things that they're suffering from is brain drain. It's young people who have a lot of promise, who grow up, who look at the landscape around them and say, you know what, I'm going to go move to Dallas, or I'm going to go move to London, or I'm going to go somewhere that's a little bit more exciting where I can make a little bit more money. And I think I'm able to, probably just by virtue of my age, more so than anybody else right now in anywhere in Lawrence County government, with the exception of maybe Chris Fry, because he's also a younger guy, go out and say, if we're going to reverse this, we need to put X, Y, and Z policies in place to try to reverse this. And so I think to that end, that's a huge benefit of being young. I also, for better or for worse, I have I like to think that I have a decent amount of energy. And, I'm not necessarily burnt out yet. I'm still running. I've kind of hit my stride at the county, which I think is a plus. In terms of cons, there's an adjustment period, right? The classical image of a politician is a guy with graying hair, this perfect suit on, a nice family, beautiful family, with a silver tongue, right? And that's just not me. And on top of that, I think a lot of people look at somebody as young as I am and say, what could he possibly bring to the table? He hasn't had the chance to experience life as we've experienced life. And what could he really contribute here? And that's just something you have to deal with. That's a credibility thing where you have to take months, sometimes a year, and in working with people, build up that credibility to where they don't look at you as this young upstart that somehow managed to pull off a countywide election. They look at you as a real, true partner that has value and is able to contribute on a significant level and work hand in hand with them who has been there for 50 years to be able to achieve something more.
So how practically do you do that? Because that bleeds into all jobs, right? You're the new guy or gal that's hired, then you're hired within a group of people that are seasoned. You're always in the back of their mind, for the most part, maybe not everyone, but a large group, what do they know? Or, like you said, they haven't experienced life. Yeah. So you have to give it some time. But how practically, what advice, I guess, would you give somebody in that situation? Like, how do you actually gain that respect in their mind?
So I think it's sort of a twofold kind of thing. Number one is you have to consistently produce a quality work product, right? You have to consistently be good at what you do. Because if you get it perfect the first 5 times and drop the ball the 6th time, for better, the mentality of people is they're going to remember the 6th time, right? The second part of that is, in a leadership role, at some level, I'm responsible for making decisions. And the decisions that I make, some people, by often than not, the votes that are cast and the decisions that are made, 90% of them are routine ministerial decisions, right? There's not a whole lot of room for disagreement, but there's the 10% of huge decisions that I make. Are we going to close the courthouse down because of COVID? Are we going to institute layoffs? Are we going to chase down this economic development project relative to this economic development project? How are we going to arrange a budget? Because quite frankly, we can't continue to fund everything.
Yeah.
Those decisions have the ability. Are we going to diversify revenue streams? What are the big core decisions that you have to make? Some people are going to disagree with, and that just is what it is. And you have to accept that. You have to accept the fact that no matter what you do when you're making those huge decisions, you're going to have 20, 30, 40% of people looking at you, sometimes more than that, and say, you know what, that's a poor decision. I disagree with that decision. And you have to be able to look back at them and say, I understand where you're coming from, but we're going to try this out.
Mm-hmm. We went through that, a little bit here at the church with all the changes and updates and upgrades when COVID hit.
Yeah.
The session and I and Seth and the staff, we had to make some big decisions to use this catastrophe, and it could have either hurt us, right, hindered us, or it could have pushed us forward. And we made a lot of decisions, I think, that not only save the church currently, but will hopefully, as the world tones down a little, hopefully, and people start returning, I think it'll even put us in a greater capacity for growth.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to read to you a quote here that Jesus says.
Absolutely.
All right? This is from Luke 14. He says, "What king," so it could be a leader or authority, "when he sets out to meet another king in battle, will not first sit down and take counsel whether he is strong enough with 10,000 men to encounter the one coming against him with 20,000? So, is there anything in there that stands out to you in particular?
Yeah, at the end of the day, and obviously I'm not as well versed in Scripture as you guys might be. I try to attend church where I can, but I'm absolutely no theologian.
Would you like me to absolve you of your sins?
I would very much appreciate that, because there are many.
That's a whole other
Join the club.
That's a whole other non-podcast discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. But no, I think that you take what counsel you can from the people you trust, right? And every day there isn't a big decision that I have made where I haven't gone and if you interpret, when you're approaching another king, I don't even would say that doesn't have to necessarily be another person.
Right. It's the idea.
Exactly. But if you're going to attack an idea, if you're going to attack a concept, if you're going to attack something in a new way, when we did our business grant program to try to do what we can to save some businesses across Lawrence County, that wasn't just done in a vacuum, right? And this what we were attacking was this idea that we can't let these guys fail. Like, fundamentally, we cannot let these guys fail. How do we go about getting some help to these guys with whatever means that we can? And so what we did was we pulled together the county's financial team, which is the 3 commissioners, the county controller, the county treasurer. We talked to our planning director, who's phenomenal, and we actually brought in a consulting firm, who actually they're our auditors. But when it comes to government finance and making sure, because when it comes to government finance, there's certain things you can do and certain things you can't do, and it doesn't always make sense. But in order to navigate that, I'm not an expert on, what are we legally allowed to spend money on.
Sure.
And all the nuances that come with that. So we pulled them in, and we sort of formed this great team, and really dug down to the problem, really thought hard about it, and were able to structure I think very comprehensive, very beneficial to the community programs for businesses, for nonprofits, for municipalities, for volunteer fire departments. But in attacking that, we rallied everybody together and said, this is this massive problem that we have. And there's a biblical quote, "Oh Lord, my ship is so small, but your sea is so great," right? And you have this huge issue, and we only have X amount of resources to deal with it. But in pulling those guys together, we said, you know what? With the resources that we have, which are not as great as the problem, we can help to solve this problem.
Mm-hmm. So, counsel, wise counsel, how critical is that?
It's absolutely crucial when you're making those huge decisions. If you make them in a vacuum, one of the things that I think that the current board does, which again there's 3 of us, is when we're able to, and sometimes you have a board member that's traveling, you have a board member who might have a meeting early on in the day, but every Monday we try to get together and with our chief attorney and our county administrator and sit down and just talk, right?
Okay.
And the goal of that, isn't even necessarily to solve a specific problem. I mean, specific problems come up and we sort of work our way through them, but it's through just sort of dynamic conversation that, one of my colleagues might bring up, hey, we have this issue in our tax claim department where I was talking to this person and we don't have a forum large enough to be able to host an auction because of COVID. We need to be able to, but at the same time, we still have to be able to host that auction. And then another colleague or the county administrator might chirp up and say, oh, well, what if we did this? And the lawyer might look at us and go, no, that's illegal. You can't do that. And then another comment might come back and say, hey, what if we did, what if we attacked it from this angle? And then another guy, oh, well, what if we tweak it this. And so collectively, we're able to work together to solve those problems. First step in solving any problem is identifying the problem. If you have wise counsel that surrounds you, you're going to be able to better identify the problem and be able to better target solutions to those problems. But if you go into something thinking that you know everything about the issue without really studying, really diving down on the issue, you might actually end up making it worse.
Wow. So in your opinion, there's obviously, we can all agree that Newcastle has a lot of problems. Lawrence County has a lot of problems. In your opinion, if you had all the resources, all the money, whatever, at your disposal right now, what would be the first thing you would do to change that, to change Lawrence County, to change Newcastle?
I would say the first thing I would do is there's something called broken windows theory, which is it's a Harvard. It comes out of a Harvard study, which is where if one house in a community is dilapidated, that's going to lead to more dilapidation, B, more crime. Crime leads to poverty, etc. Almost like a Star Wars quote. This leads to that, this leads to this leads to that. But a lot of it actually starts from blight. Just starts from a neighborhood slowly over time deteriorating to the point where, we have neighborhoods in Newcastle where every single house is going to have to be demolished. So if I had unlimited resources, the very first thing I would do would be to deploy a comprehensive strategy that consisted of A, tearing down houses that are beyond saving, right? Making those now empty parcels marketable to developers that might be able to either A, build something back, or B, you can save them for a time where maybe there's a little bit more prosperity. And for the houses that maybe are starting to fall down but aren't, what you do is you structure funding streams to help individuals who are low to moderate income, and this actually, it gets interesting, there's actually current funding streams for people with low income to get their houses rehabbed. Whether that be putting on a new roof, whether that be removing lead paint, whether that be there's funding streams that exist for those people. The problem that you encounter is the guys that are making, the households that are making $50,000 a year to $70,000 a year, right? The households, because they're making just enough money where they're not able to tap into those funding streams. But at the same time, if they've got to replace their roof and that roof replacement costs $5,000 to $10,000, that hurts them a lot. If they have an expenditure, that's in excess of $1,000, they're a lot of times, crawling, pulling up the couch, looking for quarters, going into their trying to find a way to get the money. And there's a gap there that isn't being addressed in any way, shape, or form through government right now. But just to tie it back in, structure programs for those types of individuals where we'd be able to help them get their houses back in shape, be able to help basically build back communities. You put in some parks, because we know parks, number one, increase property values. Number two, believe it or not, less crime happens in close proximity to parks. And they provide sort of a basis for community to come together, right? If you've got a basketball court and a nice basketball court and this community where a bunch of kids are able to come out and play basketball together, you're going to strengthen the community because their parents are going to come down and start talking to each other. Their siblings might get involved. That's the stuff that builds community. The other thing that I would probably do is immediately start a very comprehensive code enforcement program, which doesn't exist right now anywhere in the county. And the goal of that is not necessarily to fine people or to punish them when they're not able to afford to paint their houses or if they have a cracked sidewalk in front. It would be more to identify those issues where they come about, determine if that individual has the ability to pay for them themselves, right? And at that point, they're able to pay for them themselves. If that individual might need a little bit of help, at that point, if we have unlimited resources, the hope would be that we'd be able to provide those individuals with some help. So you build back the community comprehensively, and you do it in a way where you acknowledge, there has to be personal responsibility. There has to be. But at the same time, not everybody has the resources to be able to be responsible to the degree that we might want them to be.
So let's piggyback off of that, because that was looking at a small group, a small place, Lawrence County. What do you think? How would you answer that question for our nation?
The nation, what I find interesting about the nation is the nation's problems right now as it stands. There are some financial problems. Flint, Michigan, they need to fix the water up there. The government needs to figure out a way to scale back on their spending to make sure that we don't have deficit spending. So there are financial problems, but I think that the biggest problem with the nation is not something that can be solved with money. I think the biggest problem that we face right now, and we've seen it over the course of the past year, is the level of division across everyone in the country. And I don't even think it's everyone, by the way. I think you have two sides of a fringe, and they're both just really loud. However, they're getting a ton of attention. And because they're getting a ton of attention, they're able to attract other individuals who might be a little bit more moderate, but they're able to attract them to that sort of fringe element that are, again, loud. I don't know how to solve that problem. I think that a large degree of it takes a level of compassion, a level of understanding, a level of willing to sit down at a table with a guy who might be 100% ideologically opposed to you and say, okay, we disagree on how we should spend money. We disagree on gun rights. We disagree on access to health care. Let's find something that we agree on. Something. It could be something insanely small. It could be something as big as election reform. It could be anything. Let's find something that we agree on and work on it together.
Do you know what my favorite part of your answer was?
What?
I don't know. I think that just shows a level of humility for a 22-year-old. Because we feel like we always have to have all the answers for everything. And I have found it powerful to say to some people when they ask me question in life or about the Bible, I just don't know. Or I don't know, I'll get back to you.
Yeah.
But I appreciate that. Rather than trying to have an answer for everything, you can just be comfortable to say, oh, I don't know. Here's maybe some ideas.
Yeah.
So good for you.
Well,
you passed the Reverend Cloditis Engaged podcast test.
Well, I try my best. But that ties back into, I think, being a leader is you have, and you just said it perfectly, you have to be able to be comfortable and say, hey, there's this big issue that we're trying to tackle. I don't know how we're going to be able to tackle this issue. I don't have the expertise. I don't have the knowledge. But quite frankly, there might be people out there that do, but there's a lot of people out there that also don't. So let's go out and try something. It might fail. In fact, there's a good chance it'll fail. However, if we're deadlocked by I don't know, without even a willingness to explore ideas because they might fail, we'll never get anywhere.
I'm going to give you a magic word that I use that's extremely helpful in those situations.
What do you got?
Experiment.
Yeah.
If you say the word, let's experiment with this,
yeah,
for some reason that unlocks something in people's minds to say, yeah, I'd like to experiment with that. Because when you experiment with something, it doesn't always mean it has to stay that way. You're just experimenting. So it has this short-term effect in people's minds. We're just going to experiment and see how it goes.
Yeah.
You could always go back, but most likely you're not, or you might, but you're going to learn things along the way. But that's something I want to offer to you. Is it's such a great word just to add that in there. We're going to experiment.
I'm gonna have to.
Or how do you feel about experimenting with? Like, I can experiment with that. It's like tinkering, So just.
I'll take that back to the courthouse with me. Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. So we want to know what do you do for fun? Like just getting off of the serious stuff.
Sure.
What are your hobbies? What do you do unplug? What do you got?
So this actually happened during the mid-pandemic, right, where everything was shut down, and I can't go out to restaurants, which I do like doing. I can't go out and have a drink with a couple buddies. Traveling's heavily restricted, and so I was looking around and saying, okay, I can't just work 18 hours a day. That's just ridiculous. I need to be able to go out and have a little bit of fun. And so I was looking around Newcastle and said, okay, what's out there that would be really, really cool to do? And I found at Newcastle Airport they offer flight lessons. And so I called them up. I said, hey, you guys have any openings right now? I'd love to be able to enroll in this class. And they said, we're shut down, but we're going to reopen 2 weeks from now. I'm going to have one of the instructors text you. And so we texted back and forth. I went in the plane. Thank God he took off and landed for the first time, which I very much appreciated.
Yeah, that's always a plus. Was it a smooth ride?
No, it's because the planes are so small, right? It's not like you're flying in a 747 where if you're shifting a little bit because it's so big, it absorbs those shocks. If a gust of wind hits you, you're blowing a little bit, and that just is what it is. But I've started to learn how to fly a plane, which is I just think that's fun. The other thing, and I'm gonna go do it next week, is I'd like to, and I'm not to the point yet where I'm taking classes, but I'd like to learn how to scuba dive.
Okay. You can go to the, as we affectionately call it, the Neshannock Creek, and go scuba diving.
You absolutely. They actually, believe it or not, they have.
You might find something you don't want to see.
That's a good point. Take that advice back. Don't open your eyes under there. You may see things you don't want to see.
They have, and this is super cool in Lawrence County. Is back in the early 1900s when they were doing strip mining out in Mahoning Township and out in the Mohawk area of the county. They have these massive old abandoned quarries that are open, and they actually have scuba lessons where you can go out into these quarries that are now filled with water.
And these are legal?
I don't know how, but yes.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's
I would be interested in that. Not the flying thing.
I'm not. No.
I do not like it.
I would be interested in the flying thing, not the scuba diving thing.
No.
Yeah, I love the ocean and all that. However, when I was on my honeymoon cruise, I was actually sitting on the top deck, and there was this guy. Me and him were just talking back and forth, and I was talking about the Titanic because when I was a kid, I loved the Titanic. I loved like all kinds of shipwrecks, whatever. And then the guy goes, "It's crazy to think that underneath us is just 3 more miles of ocean." And for whatever reason, when he said that, like ever since then, I've had like this fear of like being in the ocean, or like the quarry would drive like that would send my anxiety through the roof because you don't know what's down there. And I've seen enough horror movies to know that if you're scuba diving in an abandoned rock quarry, it's probably not a good idea.
Yeah, that's how every scary movie pretty much starts. If there's water involved, it's not gonna
just
end well.
Just like if you buy an extremely nice house for almost a ridiculously cheap price,
something's wrong.
You know there's something going on in that
Something
house.
bad happened in that house.
A doll is coming to life out of a closet somewhere.
Do not bring a Raggedy Ann doll in the house.
Yeah. So the flying thing, because not too many horror movies start off with a flying experience.
Snakes on a plane.
Boom.
Yeah, but that's more of a snake thing than a plane
Wait, remember the Gremlins? Was there? Never mind. I'm 23.
Yeah, 20. I see. You got to dumb it down to 22.
Yeah, sorry. But that didn't come out during my era. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm a huge plane nerd just in general. So
there's one back here.
Yeah, that would be
cool.
that would be a huge. That was like one of my bucket list things as a kid, and still is on my list.
You should 100% do it. I'm telling you, Newcastle, Haskey Aviation in Newcastle. I'll give them a plug. Great. It's a great program. The instructor that I have, his name's Pat. He's phenomenal. And it's honestly, the nice thing about flying is you get up into the clouds and you forget about everything else.
Yeah, that's not happening. That's not happening. What I'm thinking about is I'm closer to Jesus, and even though I love him, I don't know that I want to meet him right now. I'm just letting you know that.
I just want to get in a plane, fly right above your house, and then just cut the grass.
Listen, when I was in Georgia, and we just have to be mindful of time. I want to read this before we're done. So one of the things, you're either driving 14 hours home on break. I mean, you're looking at a week, so it's like you're eating up, a significant amount, a day and a half or 2 days of that.
Yeah.
So we would drive or fly home. It wasn't that far. I mean, it was Atlanta, so it was like an hour and a half.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say the craziest things to the who are they? The girls walking up and down the aisle.
The stewardesses.
I'd say the craziest things, and this was pre 9/11, thank God, because they would have clearly I would not. I guarantee you, I would not have made the flight home. Like for the things I was saying. I mean, I would question them about like, is there gas on the plane? Are we gonna make it home? Like all kind of crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And the reason why I asked you about the wind, the turbulence.
Yeah, I don't know. I just call it wind, but yeah.
I'm just telling you right now. I am not liking when I see people like relaxed on a plane. Mm-hmm. I don't like it.
I told my my county administrator, who's scared to death of flying. I told him we have to go to Harrisburg for commissioner conferences every quarter or something like that, pre-COVID. I told him, I said, next time we're allowed to go in person, I said, I am flying and you are coming with me. And he goes, there is no way I'm doing that. There's no way I'm getting on that plane. I said, Joe, you are...
All right, listen, let's go back to this, all right?
Yeah.
Good stuff. It's called The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni.
Yeah.
You have you're familiar with him, and he wrote a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. You read that, and this is what put him on the map.
Yeah.
But this is an excellent book I would recommend. And earlier today, before we came here, we were talking in the office, and we were talking about work culture and how important it is to have a good dynamic of a team. So he has this quote. I want to read it, okay? He says, a good way to understand a working group is to think of it like a golf team. I guess I was wrong earlier. Where players go off and play on their own and then get together and add up their scores at the end of the day. A real team is more like a basketball team. One that plays together simultaneously in an interactive, mutually dependent, and often interchangeable way.
Yep.
Most working groups call themselves teams because that's the word society uses to describe them. Becoming a real team requires an intentional decision on the part of its members. I like to say that teamwork is not a virtue, it is a choice and a strategic one. Mm-hmm. Give us, and I just want to be mindful of time.
Sure.
Give us, do you agree, disagree, why, and the importance of building a strong team when you want to move forward in your case, but in any case?
Sure. So I'll actually give you an example of how we've actually structured our sort of internal office. So the 3 commissioners, the county administrator, and our chief attorney, is we looked at early on, right? We looked at each other and said, this organization is so massive and there's so many different things going on here that one person, we can't possibly manage to keep up with it. And on top of that, there are different people with us in our group that have different skill sets. And so it wasn't even an active decision, really. It was sort of, hey, I have an interest in this. I'm going to go chase after. And no words were ever said. It was just like for Commissioner Spielvogel, for example, is one of my colleagues. She handles the jail, which is, believe it or not, a massive undertaking, and handles children and youth services. I don't want anything to do with either one of those. I can if I need to. I just don't want to. And I handle, effectively, the finances, economic development, and a couple other things. Joe Vanasco, who's our county administrator, he handles our human services programming largely, as well as general operation things. And then Commissioner Vogler, who's my second colleague, he handles a lot of our regional representation. In other words, there's a lot of boards that counties are given a seat on, and he's been around for forever, so he knows everybody and is able to sort of bring that level of experience to the table. But we made sort of this active decision. We basically said, okay, this is a team here. We have to trust each other, and we're going to divide up these responsibilities, and we're going to conquer it together. The decisions at the end of the day have to be made collectively, but you're going to be the point man on this, you're going to be the point man on this, and you're going to be the point man on this. And so far, it's actually worked extraordinarily well.
So in a real way, you were the golf team.
Yeah.
And then you became the basketball team.
Yes, and that believe it or not, that golf team, I think, sort of how it was for the first couple of weeks, where everybody was coming to us for everything. And so we're sitting. It was almost like holding court. We're sitting at that conference table in my office, and you've just had you had one person coming in telling all 3 of us about this issue. You have one person coming in telling all 3 of us about this issue, and it didn't make any sense for the 3 of us to just be doing everything, as opposed to trusting each other, saying, okay, you go handle sort of the administrative functions of this, you do this, and comes back to on Mondays, we'll get together, we'll discuss any large overarching problems that we're having, and then, if there's some issue that if there's a financial issue with the jail, hey, let's figure out how we can work this through. If there is an issue with economic development where I need to be able to talk to somebody out of Erie, I go to, hey, who do you know up in Erie that we'd be able to sort of bring to the table and collaborate? And that's worked. It's working well.
Okay, so he's on to something then. It's critical for organizational continuity, leadership, and getting things done.
You have to be able to lean on people that surround you. If you don't do that, you don't have that level of trust.
Yeah.
Then you're not going to be able to get very far.
Then in his own terms, it's dysfunctional.
Yes.
And if the top is dysfunctional, everything's going to be dysfunctional.
Yes.
And I think that might be a good place to wrap it up here, Seth.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Listen, Commissioner, we appreciate it. We appreciate your time, your insight. This has been excellent. You have a bright future ahead of you, and we're hoping that in the future you can come back on.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much for reaching out. I had a great time.
Yeah. So for the listeners out there, please like, subscribe, share the good news of what you see here. Help support this podcast. And Commissioner, what you're doing is excellent. So we hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time.
All right. See you.
Awesome.